Okay. Okay.
Thank you so much.
So, good evening, folks. Welcome to the Flemington Lyceum Society Lecture Series. This is our, I think our seventh one. And if you don't know much about what this Lyceum thing is, because I'm seeing some faces I haven't seen some familiar faces, but there's folks I haven't seen before. So Lyceum was actually a movement which was pretty popular in the 1800s, early 1800s, so about the early 1900s. It fizzled out in Flemington around 1920. And it was basically a movement dedicated to kind of flattening the idea of education. It was very community oriented. It gathered, they had actual buildings that people would gather in, and we had one here. It's now the firehouse in Flemington, and connected to that is Borough Hall, where I actually serve as a councilman. And basically, way back, it was a building called the Lyceum. Court Street, which runs, right up in front of the firehouse, was called Lyceum Street. And it was quite a thing, and it's quite a history we have, and it was all over the place. And when I found out about it, I did a lot of research with the Huntington Historical Society and found a minute book from the Stockton Lyceum, which was absolutely amazing to read. And if you're curious about any of that, the first lecture's on our Borough YouTube channel page, and you can watch that one. It's back in May. That was the first lecture. It's very, very history oriented, but I wanted to kind of, let the new folks know, like, that's what this is. It's kind of bringing back a very old idea, a very old thing, and it's community engagement and civic engagement. It's like the original social network, like people want to learn stuff, right, from one another. So what I did was I put together this lecture series and found people I thought who were experts in their topic, and we talked about housing. I had a professor from Temple University talk about that. His area of expertise was planning. I had the Flemington Community Partnerships executive director talking about all these wonderful ways that you can have events in town and promote businesses, those small businesses primarily. And then we had that lecture and actually walked out into Stangle and saw all these cool ideas like manifested. So it was like a real thing. It wasn't just people talking about like, this would be cool to have. It's like, well, here it is, look at it. So we've had the whole thing here. We've had it all. And tonight, I think this is gonna be a special one because when I put this list together, primarily I'm a high school teacher. So obviously I have, I think education is important, but I think our generations are important. And what's interesting about tonight is, we're gonna be hearing from the next generation, perhaps future leaders, we'll say. All right, but a couple of youngsters who are in my opinion, quite impressive. So I just wanted to thank Jason. I don't know where Jason went off, but for the wonderful violin music. He's also a senior at Huntington Central. And not only does he play violin, but he's a piano, trombone, and bass player. So he's got the orchestra covered. So our guest lecturers tonight, they're also accomplished seniors at Huntington Central. And when I reached out to my colleagues, because I got a lot of reach, my friend Meg Dunhauser had taught them, and in her opinion, these were two individuals who were the perfect match for this particular topic. And who am I to judge teachers? Who am I to judge a teacher's judgment, right? So I'll let you know about them in a moment, but I do want to kind of, talk to you about a couple of things. So here it's youth and civic voice. Are we listening to the next generation? Okay. And when I put this together, one of the things I'm an English teacher, but I love American history. And one of my favorite eras is the Revolutionary era. And when I was in fifth grade, I'll never forget it. My teacher, Mrs. Sorge, made us memorize the preamble to the Constitution and Lincoln's Gettysburg Address. And they're both, possible things to. It's not that difficult, but it's stressful when you're in fifth grade. And she would call us up to her desk, and we would all recite the preamble. And if you tripped over something, you got to go sit down, work on it. Jeremy, come on up, all right? If you had a similar experience growing up, you know, it's the introduction. That's it. This is the introduction. We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and to our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. Obviously, the word is highlighted, underlined. It's an odd word, it's an archaic word, right? But this was a value in that era, okay? And there's a great book by a historian, David Hackett Fisher. It's called Paul Revere's Ride, I'm sorry. And of the, you know, these early Whigs who eventually become the revolutionary minds, he said of these people, they took a long view of the temporal conditions in a way that Americans rarely do today. And he notes John Quincy Adams urged his contemporaries to think of your forefathers, think of your posterity. So that's the long view. Think of who got us here, think of where this is going. So where is this going? All right, so my friends here, let me tell you about it real quick. Alexis, she's been heavily involved in promoting youth civic engagement within the community. At school, she leads the New Jersey Youth and Government Delegation, Model UN Delegation, as well as serves as the editor-in-chief for the school newspaper, The Lamp. Additionally, she's also served as the state cabinet officer of the NJYAG for 2 years to lead in organizing a statewide conference and bridging the gap between science, education, and civics. Recently, she's also taken on a new role to lead the middle school YAG program to foster and promote civic engagement among the state's youngest constituents. To cap off her time at Central, she now acts as a student representative to the Board of Education and works to bring student engagement and voices to where they're most needed, but often least heard. Olivia over here is a self-proclaimed biggest fan of Ulysses S. Grant in Reddington Township. She's passionate about service, contextualizing democracy on a global scale, and of course, civic action. Olivia is involved as an officer in several clubs at Central, including Interact, Model UN, and the Jewish Culture Club. Outside of school, Olivia is a lead youth ambassador for the New Jersey Division of Civil Rights and has interned for her district state senator. After graduation, she aspires to become an international humanitarian lawyer. In her free time, Olivia enjoys walking among Hunterdon's beautiful landscapes, reading, pampering her cats, and watching Band of Brothers with her friends. So this is the part where I shut up and hand things off to my friends here. So Alexis and Olivia, this lecture hall is all yours.
All right, thank you so much for that lovely introduction. Okay. So, no. Okay, so we're gonna start with a fun little game called Spot the Youth. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna show you a series of images from different like town meetings and different civic spaces, and your job is to spot the youth. Okay, so first image. There are many to count, so take your time.
In the middle? Maybe? What's your definition of you?
Okay, so for context, this is a meeting with municipal officials and businesses with the Economic Development Director, Mark Sadek. Do we see any? All right, moving on. So this is a state assembly hearing on adopting a new definition of anti-Semitism, so relatively recently. Anyone here? All right. And what about here? Any luck? No, these two dashing gentlemen. They might be able to pass. All right, now what about this one?
Yes. I've heard that.
Yeah. And so this is the board meeting for Hunterdon Central, when many students came together to express issues about LGBTQ plus media bans at the school. So let's first establish why why do we think that there were more young people in the last photo than in the first? And this is open for discussion.
Well, that last one was at school, right?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, more accessible.
Space they're comfortable, maybe.
Exactly, yeah, definitely more comfortable culture environment.
And issues that are directly affecting them.
Yes, issues that are driving you. Anything else?
Repeat the main three there.
Yeah.
Alright. So why are we talking about youth voice in civic spaces? Why are we focusing specifically on our youngest members of their constituencies?
Okay, so first, democracy entails representing all people, and part of that representation includes descriptive representation, wherein our stewards to the law are people that physically resemble us. And this is especially important for young people when over 130 million Americans are under the age of 30, which you might be a little flattered by that wide range. But this is just generally like the accepted age range for academia and political parties.
Now, representation can often lack insight into the opinions and the common interests of different generations. So youth civic engagement can often offer that perspective and clarity. And additionally, government is the industry with the second highest median employee age out of all industries in the US, and that age is around 47 years old. So let's take a closer look at this generation gap. So as you can see, a recent New York Times article pointed to the fact that Congress now has more 70 plus members of Congress than ever before, which is very significant. And if we're looking at state leadership in general, we can also see that state leadership is on the whole an average age of about 56 to 58 years old. So we can see that our elected officials across both federal and state administrations lean on the older side. And if we're talking not just about elected officials, but government employees and officials in general, we can see that the federal employee age has a 20% rate of being 55 years of age or older. So evidently, government in America skews older. Now we've established this. However, the issue isn't just the age of politicians and government officials, rather it's with the removal of their experiences and their common knowledge of what the youth can consider and their youngest constituents. And what's interesting is that youth with 130 million Americans under the age of 30 are a very significant portion of these constituencies. So when you have strong generation gaps, you are farther removed from the experiences and thus the will of the people. Now, if we're talking about elected officials, let's look more closely into youth behavior around these elections that are impacting the age and the politicians who are in these offices. Now, you can see here, according to a study from the Center for Information and Research on Civic Learning and Engagement at Tufts University, or Circle at Tufts, they conducted a comparison of youth voter turnout in the presidential elections in 2020 and then in 2024. And really interestingly, they found not only was youth voter turnout quite low, lower than the other age demographics, but it actually decreased from 2020 to 2024 from 53% to 42%. So less than half all eligible youth voters are showing up at the polls. And this is even more concerning when you see the fact that voting history often directly correlates to civic action. So now we're seeing even less engagement, even less intention of youth voters to be participating in civic spaces.
Okay, so somewhat intuitively, youth are obviously more inclined to partake in civic action when they care about the issues at stake. But what might be somewhat counterintuitive is what those issues are and what issues actually galvanize them. So another little discussion question, what issues do we think are most prevalent to young people? What issues do they care about? And what issues are ones that really provoke them?
Social.
Social issues, yeah. Any specific ones?
I'd probably say things that relate to diversity, inclusion, also just access to social services that they may get.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Right, for
Absolutely,
sure.
yeah, we definitely seen that in our community. Anything Yeah. else?
What about the environment?
Yeah,
That's a good one.
for sure, for sure. Yeah,
You wanna grow up in a world that has a future,
yeah,
I don't know.
yeah. Do we think that young people are more geared towards social issues or economic issues like cost of living or healthcare or job security?
I would say in my experience, it's more social.
Social? Yeah, alright. So here we have kind of like our divide between, on the left, we have our more social issues like gun policy, LGBTQ plus issues, free speech, racism, and immigration, and obviously on our right are our more economic issues. So for the people that said social issues, you are right that this is what galvanizes youth the most. And we saw that at the Board of Education meeting and at various other civic spaces as well. And we can also kind of see its inverse where we didn't see young people at those economic tables or those more like budget hearing type things. And so this actually has research to back it up. Social issues like these have the strongest association with youth movements, and people that rank these as their top 3 priorities were more likely to report being part of a political movement. So again, you're right that this is what arouses most young people. But when we turn it over to economic issues, this is actually what more young people are right as their top issue in the 2024 election. So it's somewhat counterintuitive. In fact, in the 2024 election, 53% of young people saw the cost of living as one of their top issues. And so we're kind of seeing a discrepancy here, right? We see that there's more young people coming out for social issues, even though the majority of young people prioritize economic ones. And so we can kind of see this in this graphic here. So if we think about young people that prioritize social issues, if they're part of the minority, they're sort of part of this loud minority, right? So what we found in our research was that even though again they were part of a more loud minority, they were more pushed to civic action than those that prioritize economic issues. And so we can kind of see this circulating and therefore isolating the vast majority of young people. So if more people are driven to social issues to take civic action, then that is going to be invigoration. And as more and more young people get invigorated, more and more young people get to the streets, get to the podium and speak their voice, then they're obviously going to have more visibility. And so when people see more and more visibility, then they're less likely to feel alone. And then they're more likely to join this community and have solidarity and have a more centralized passion for a specific issue. And then each one of these is going to reinforce each other, thereby strengthening a social movement, despite it being the minority. Now, the reason that this becomes problematic is that now all of our civic engagement spaces, all of our protests, all the people going to the podiums are all cater to the most galvanizing issues, but not the most popular ones. And so then that means that all of our civic spaces aren't representative of our youth voices.
So this begs the question, how can we make civic spaces more representative of our young people, of one of the most significant portions of constituents in America? So first of all, we need to learn how to serve youth interests and meet youth where they're at. So first of all, we can start with interdisciplinary civic pathways. Many current civic spaces focus primarily on policy or law or political action in general. And a lot of students might want to advocate for their opinions, for their interests, and for their beliefs, but they don't know how to do that in a way that situates other interests in other fields besides law and politics. So we need to provide a space for every interest of youth to be involved, like business, STEM, performing arts, writing, creative arts, etc. And we also focus on youth-specific issues. What can youth see that directly impacts their daily lives? With youth voters, for example, in the circle study we saw where youth were asked to rank their top 3 priorities, we saw again, most youth were more likely to take action about social issues that they could see that directly impacted their daily lives, like LGBTQ issues or racism or free speech. But even though they cared more about economic issues, it might have been harder for them to see how that directly affected their daily behavior. So job stability, healthcare, and mental health are crucial to students and youth that they see, but it might be harder for them to find access to spaces that provide for action.
And so the goal with this is to just engage youth. Now, the second thing is to facilitate a youth-friendly culture. And so what does this mean? This means that providing digestible context and content. When a lot of young people might go to these civic spaces that are generally geared towards older constituents, they may get lost in the conversation of what's happening and what happened at previous meetings. And so it becomes hard to step into that. Secondly, it should also be engaging. Young people should want to actively participate, as well as the community itself want to actively seek out youth participation. And so what this means is providing activities that young people are able to be actually a part of. And it secondly, or also thirdly, also respecting and accommodating student schedules. Obviously, we know that students are very busy people, and so having board meetings at 7 p.m. on a Monday night with a pile of homework at home isn't the most student-friendly culture. And lastly, having stability and consistency. Just like any other people, young people are most susceptible to change and instability. So it's really important that we have that sort of regulation and consistency there. And the goal with this is to maintain that engagement that we just got.
And third is to listen to youth voice. So what's really important here, once we have these civic spaces for students to take action and to be able to engage and maintain their involvement within their community and within civic spaces, it's important to let them lead in discussions, contribute their ideas, and directly be involved within decision making, especially when it directly affects their daily lives and their personal experiences. It's important to value this youth perspective because youth contribute so much to community and play such a large role in the future maintenance of that community. But without understanding those perspectives, we can't properly prepare for when they are fully in charge of these civic spaces. And so along those lines, it's important to allow people to drive novelty and change instead of just working within the existing system, allow them to contribute change, let their ideas actually spread new decisions and new novel change. So the whole point here is to contribute perspective and not drive it, and therefore improve civic spaces in general through listening to civic voice.
All right, let's go back to our fun little game again, spot the youth.
Depending.
Yes. So again, we're gonna show a couple different images, and your job now is to spot the young people. Hopefully now with some learned lessons. So does anyone see any young people in these images?
Tons.
Yes.
Yeah.
So the common denominator across all of these is they're all spaces that have made room for young people. So for example, in the top right, something that Montgomery County does is they have a youth advisory board where they select student leaders to help advise them on youth matters that matter to the community. And then obviously in the bottom right, we have similar things in another municipality where we have another youth leadership board.
And then over here, we have our very own student representatives at Harvard Central, who are able to contribute their perspectives to the administration's decision-making, as well as attend board meetings and be a presence for youth engagement and for solidarity between different generations contributing to community decision-making at our board meetings.
So now it's finally time to give space to youth civic voice.
And that started with you. By being here and listening to our lecture, you've already given space and engaged with student youth voice.
Thank you so much for listening.
So, thank you, that was excellent. Now, usually in these Lyceum lectures, we do have a question and answer, and it's all very casual, right? So usually, you know, if audience members have questions for our lecturers, that would be the time. We can, sometimes we'll tend to have crosstalk or whatever. So I guess I'm gonna throw it out to the crowd here. Does anyone have any questions for these students?
So it's kind of intentional. You know. Encourage youth to vote when they turn 18. Do they promote it? Do they endorse it? Do they teach civics at all? Because back in the day, when I was your age, we had civic instruction in high school. Do they still do that now?
So New Jersey in 2021 mandated a law for New Jersey middle schools to teach civic education. There's various kind of student-led clubs that help to promote like youth civic engagement, and we have different voter registration drives, but those are primarily youth-driven instead of like the school kind of promoting it. Does anyone have any other questions?
When you look for engagement, is it strictly sort of attending these meetings, or are there other ways that you're looking for youth to engage?
That's a great question. I think it does start with making public meetings and hearings more accessible for youth and making it more engaging and helping youth understand how that directly impacts their lives. But then it is great to take a step farther than that and have youth be directly integrated into decision making and into community leadership. Like we saw in some of the pictures on our last slide, a lot of other municipalities like Montgomery and Evesham in New Jersey, they have like youth advisory boards and youth leadership councils where youth can directly contribute to local council decisions and things like that without, you know, imposing on any sort of like elected representation, but they're still able to engage past just attending.
I know where I'm not from this county. They have a program, our mayor and council actually have a committee that is where they have youth sit in on that committee. And it's usually events based, I think, for within the town to help with planning. I'm also a merit badge counselor for scouting, and we have 4 merit badges: citizenship in society, sit in community, sit in nation, and sit in world. And part of those is with community, they have to come out to meetings such as this. And it's very difficult. Sometimes I try to bring them out in a group because that's easier for them to kind of get a voice and be seen in the room. But what other ways might I encourage local government to give them a seat at the table?
I think by maybe promoting the idea that one day they're gonna be part of the electorate and they're gonna be the voters that they have to face. And, you know, if they can establish that connection and understanding of this generation now, they're gonna have a much stronger and perhaps more reliable electorate later on.
And it's also about building community too, not just focusing on the political outcomes. I think sometimes when it comes to local government, maybe that's more of the goal to creating strong community bonds between different generations, different demographics. So I think it's important to kind of find a balance between political motivations and community motivations, depending on what form of local government you're talking to. But I think both of those can definitely really help with encouraging group engagement.
So if the students in Central noticed who got elected mayor in New York City,
Yes.
For sure. We do have.
and I would think that would resonate, right?
Yeah, definitely. We have some civics classes. We both taken AP US government. So I think in history and civics, we have classes that's definitely like a discussion we've had for sure. And I have noticed other students talking about that. I think it really depends on the group of students you see, how engaged they personally are.
So speaking of civic education, we have a discussion question. Okay. Increasing young civic engagement has remained a bipartisan priority across the nation, with New Jersey mandating civic education being taught in middle schools in 2021 and a current $1 billion investment in civic education being proposed by Democrats and Republicans in the US Senate. While this lecture explored many ways that the community can civically engage young people, is it more effective to civically educate? Then we can ponder this. And we can also like have a group discussion as well and bounce off of other people's ideas.
I think just from a teacher perspective, right, is that it is, I was lucky enough to be their teacher as a year. They taught me a lot, but I think we feel limited sometimes in terms of how we can approach things. And we have to make sure that like we hear sort of all voices and stuff like that. But it is interesting that there are like, it'll be interesting to see what happens with that, with the $1 billion, right? That like if we've gotten like climate change standards, that you're supposed to teach climate change in all classes now, right? In some way, like could we eventually have civics standards in all classes, and then we're required by the state to teach it. So that's, I don't know, that's awesome that it's maybe on the horizon.
Yeah,
for sure.
and, you know, Gus, you had asked like civics education in the classroom. As another teacher, I can tell you, you know, not so much the structural, and it's an English class, right?
Three branches of government.
Right, not-
Term limits and all that.
those things, 100%, right? I mean, that's boilerplate, that is, everyone should have that basic understanding. The fact that people don't, that's frightening, right? But I think for me personally, you know, my biggest thing has always been like the class discussion. And the idea that you have in a Socratic format where there's a lot of questions going on. It's a naturally flowing conversation, whether you're talking about a book or an argument or something. And there's skills that come along with that they will apply to adulthood as a citizen, right? Like you've got to know how to have a debate. You've got to know how to have a disagreement. You've got to know how to do that in a way that, you know, if you're looking for what I've always striven for, and as a councilman too, is common ground, you know, where do we agree, right? Because that's where you gotta start. And you know, in this, we all have seen it, a lot of us are old enough to have seen things degrade, where the civic engagement has diminished, the sort of hyper political stuff has increased as that's gone down. So maybe we should kind of do that, and whether it's the government, federal government or the state government requiring certain standards and requiring education, that might be one thing, but I think it's everybody's responsibility. I mean, these two said, you know, that now you, what will you do with this knowledge? Like that's, I think, important. You know, we all have to be responsible. And I think, you know, not to kind of take away anything, but back to the idea of like this posterity, like that was a mindset that looked at the past and the future and that linkage. And when I think about that, it's amazing because like, are we doing that? We still have that mindset? Can we get it back? I mean, that's the thing. And we're saturated with information and media and access, but we have a loneliness epidemic, we have mental health issues increasing, we just have a lot going on. And maybe it's take that pause and listen, right? I mean, for me, I hate to go off on a rant, but I mean, that's what I think. You know, that's what you reminded me of, is like what I see in the classroom, what can I create? They'll take it with them, you know, like, oh, I remember, yeah, we had these conversations in Mr. Long's class and he gave us a chance to, you know, bounce ideas around and, you know, he showed us how to disagree, but also agree at the same time. It's a, you know, it's a fun game and, you know, in the end, it's somebody showing up at a council meeting and like, hey, what are you gonna do about, you know, there's all this going on, construction, what are you gonna do about this in my backyard? How do you present that in a forum? And that's, I think, what's important.
How often do young people show up to council meetings? Right, like,
I mean, I've seen Girl Scouts and Cub Scouts and Scouts come for various reasons, celebrations. You know, I think we've had awards for various things for younger folks, you know, police explorers and stuff. But off the top of my head, when I look out in the audience, as a matter of fact, you don't see many people. I think you had a good point.
Yeah.
Honestly,
Yeah.
unless something's going on.
I'm not going to
Oh,
council
we,
meetings either.
pitchforks and torches come out, right? But oftentimes, you know, you'll have public hearings for ordinances, like very important stuff. It's gonna affect people for years. And you'll get none or one or two, and if it's a real like big issue, you'll have people. Sometimes it's coordinated with neighbors. That's, you know, it's good when you have that sort of thing happening, but it's not a lot. You mentioned the time of day. I had a question for you two is 7 PM, that's council meeting, 7 PM, Board of Ed meeting, 7 PM, right? Everything's after work, at night, after dinner. Quite honestly, I know you're busy. We're busy too. I'm tired, right? I'm tired. I wanna sit, I wanna watch TV, you know, read my books and, how do we solve that problem? Like, is that something that we can do? Like, I'm curious, you know, what do you think is?
I think
Or way
it
to
is
do this?
difficult, I see what you mean for sure, and also it is harder when you're trying to engage youth and students specifically, it's even harder when you have meetings held at that in the middle of the day or even like right after school, it's like a lot harder for students to attend and to engage in. I think, at least from our experience, with, like the Board of Ed meetings and stuff, maybe more of an issue with that is like advertisement, and just knowledge of that going on within the school. I think a lot of times meetings are kind of, announced like on morning announcements and things like that. Like the day of, so it's a lot harder to plan for a meeting that might be out of your way. I know, like, I live 20-25 minutes away from the school, and people from my sending district, I think, have a much harder time trying to attend. Like the Hunterdon board meetings compared to maybe Readington Township schools, so it really depends on, I guess, the school and the dynamic with like the student population.
Yeah. I mean, I think also if we want to prioritize and centralize youth is to like ask them like what works for you. And then also kind of in turn, if people are saying, oh yeah, like I'm available then it's like their time that they're setting for themselves, and so they're more likely to come instead of something that they have to go to that someone else set. So I think making space where young people are centralized and prioritized, even if that's not every space, as long as we create specific designated ones.
And I imagine that's where like a youth council could come in handy, right? Because that's a space where they could kind of determine when and where.
Right,
they meet
exactly.
Versus having to go to what the grown-up
Yeah.
version is, right? But still have that potential for influence. That's really interesting. Okay. I also wonder too, with adults, I'm thinking back to some stuff people were talking about earlier with civic education and opportunities that students have, to Jeremy's point about like being able to take some of the things that they might learn about communication or just civic discussion in classes to something outside of school. I don't know, I feel like anytime that's been attempted, it feels like grownups don't give teenagers the time of day, right? Like I've had students who write because they're very passionate about an idea, write to officials and ask like, hey, this is something that needs to be considered. And then it's radio silence, no one even responds. And so I don't know what that solution is, but I feel like that's a huge hurdle to overcome. Because if you do kind of take that step to get involved and then no one even responds or acknowledges that you did it. I imagine that's just that puts the roadblock there and you're done,
Yeah.
super disheartening. So I don't know what the solution is to that, but I do think that's a big hurdle.
It is a big like catch-22 in a way, because I think a lot of adults kind of assume teenagers aren't wanting to engage, and it's not like a lack of access or a lack of knowledge, more so lack of interest in general. And sometimes that is reflected in data like certain studies where youth have the lowest voter turnout and things like that. But other times I think a big issue there is that if adults want to see how youth are able to engage and interested in engaging, they need to be able to allow their voices heard. And then when they don't provide for that, then they assume that interest isn't present. So it just kind of goes back and forth in like a loop.
Yeah, for sure.
I really like Mr. Long's point earlier too about finding common ground and the ability to like learn how to have proper and effective discourse in civic engagement and civic education in schools, because I think a big criticism about civic education movements right now is that it focuses too much on just educating people about engagement opportunities and about the systems that we live in and that we need to be able to engage civically in, and less so about teaching the skills that are required to have discussions over youth involvement and community change. And I think Alexis and I were talking about a lot before, whether civic education is the cause of youth engagement and youth pushes for more involvement, or whether it's just complementary. You want to talk more about that?
Yeah, no. So that was gonna be part of our presentation, whether civic education was a true causal driver of of youth engagement, or if it was simply complementary. And a lot of the reason why we're focusing on community impact instead of educational is because we feel that education is more complementary to the actual engagement, right? Because a lot of the things that are taught in civic education classes bring about a lot of those skills of like learning about government functions, knowledge, democracy, and also just even feelings of responsibility. but it's hard when you have no places to actually translate and apply that to. So obviously, like, we don't want one or the other, but to have a system that works in tandem with one another.
Anybody have any more questions? Unless we want to move on to other discussion questions.
I have a question. I was wondering if in your research you came across any statistics that would point towards people under 30, but maybe in that college graduate school age group where they're very civic minded and they're very interested in advocating in the public space for a certain issue, if that translates into actual showing up at the polls.
That's a really good question. In these studies that we were looking at, a lot of the ranking of priorities and about, I guess, issues that cause them to want to take action at the polls were only of youth who were already registered voters and who were already taking that, step to show up at the polls and to contribute, civically. So that is definitely a really good question. I would want to explore that further, for sure, absolutely. So democratically speaking, one of the most effective ways to influence policy decisions is for a large majority of the electorate to depend on the issue at hand. And many cities across the US have lowered the voting age to 16 for school board elections because that directly impacts youth, including New York, New Jersey, which was a very big headline when that was passed, to promote youth interest to political dependency. So should Flemington consider increasing its electorate for youth school board elections to its youngest constituents, like 16 or 17? It's a fun food for thought question.
Yes, period.
Yeah.
Why?
I mean, right, the students that I'm lucky enough to interact with, I think are really thoughtful about things, and I think these decisions are about you and the students who are coming up who will be like you. And I think, you know, people of a certain age, right, like, we vote for maybe like the world we have now and not the world to come, right? I don't know, I think students would be a little more forward thinking with some things, yeah.
It's like, it's that directly this affects me. I lived in a town, we had an HOA. Which I'm not gonna say much, other than if you know what an HOA is, you know certain things go with that. And I remember showing up there, cause I had a gripe about the gutters and the gutter cleaning, and it was the homeowner's responsibility. The problem is, all the homes were connected, it was a big, long string there's like 8 homes. And I said, so if my neighbor doesn't clean his, it's going into mine, even though I clean mine, and then it'll still be a problem. They're like, well, that's how it is. I'm like, okay. So that affected me to the point where I'm like, okay, time to move. Okay, fine. But I think of students in that way too. It's like they're seeing the quality in their face, right? And whatever, you know, it's amazing how many decisions are made, well, budget wise. I guess then my question from that is, like, I saw the issue with the gutter policy. Does your typical student see like, oh, they're not investing the money into this, or they're moving money, like, is there, I don't know. Do you think students 16 years old are thinking as intensely as I was about a gutter? You know what I mean? I guess that, I'm trying to, like, you know, I'm trying to understand, you know, because it's been a long time since I've been a teenager.
I think that in my personal experience, a lot of students are very well aware of what's happening, whether that's like on the board level or even in other local politics. But a lot of their thoughts and concerns stays within their own enclaves of other young people, because they're not able to have those platforms of voice that either are inaccessible to them or simply uncomfortable for them. And so I think by creating a ballot for them, I think they can have their voice that way. As well as restructuring other things where even if they don't have a political vote in something, they can have a voice in other ways.
It's kind of like what you showed in your slides of where's the youth? And where did they show up? They showed up at the board. So I think if you lowered it to 16 and more of the youth who may not be engaged may end up going to the board, and it's their first experience of civic engagement, and then it may translate into more community civic engagement.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would imagine it would really encourage more lifelong
Yes.
voting.
Because that's their
Especially if
safe
you see-
space.
Yes,
for
and if
them
you
to
see the results, you
Yeah.
were talking before about galvanizing people, right? If they had that big of an, I imagine if the entire school body, right, voted on something, they would probably make up the majority of voters in a school board election, and so the impact would be so real, you know?
I remember when, unit lunch and then,
Yeah.
more recently, Care Plus were, in danger of being removed by a board vote. That was, I think, was the only two times when I saw students like really take action, to prevent a change happening within their own school, because they saw like their way of life was being threatened. And, there were two petitions on change.org that had like over 1,000 or 2,000 signatures that were student led and, student promoted, because they care so deeply about these issues and these, I guess provisions were being taken away by a board of adults who they really had no way to contribute their perspective to. I think that was one of the big changes that was tried to make with adding student representatives, was to have a place for student voice to be heard among the board, but then that kind of became a little more of an issue. I know Lex probably can talk more about that. It's harder for the student reps to speak at the actual meetings when public isn't able to be present. It's more like behind the scenes work, which the public doesn't see, which voters don't see. I also know, considering lowering voting age, a big criticism there is, oh, well, students that young aren't as knowledgeable about the issues the electorate would be focused on when they're at the polls. But I think my response to that is that students who don't know don't really care enough to vote. So the students who you see voting are ones who are already taking the effort to inform themselves or have been informed in another way.
To answer that, I think that you see that as a lifelong pattern. People are really only enthusiastic and publicly engaged in what is directly affecting them in the moment, at an election. I mean, you look at like that age old thing, like, well, why do I wanna pay school taxes when I don't have a child in the district? Even if it's a parent who has grown children who've been through that school system, they kind of like, I'm done paying taxes here. And there's not an understanding of the importance of a collective good in that community. And there needs to be, I think, just a better way of educating people as children, and they grow up in the engagement process to work towards the collective good, as opposed to what is affecting them this particular moment.
That's a great point. We were just talking in our French class about communitarianism, which can seem like a positive force when you're thinking of a community supporting their common interests and focusing on a collective between themselves, and then it can kind of veer into a fault almost, where they're only focusing on good between themselves and not trying to branch out and connect to other demographics or to the larger community. So I think like focusing on a collective good instead of just, taxpayers whose students have graduated and moved out of the district, versus parents whose students are currently in the district, so they're paying taxes for, about kind of combining those perspectives to see how they can better the district.
Yeah.
I think also by making student board or school board elections open to 16 and 17-year-olds to vote on makes issues a lot more public and a lot more real. I think a lot of times when I go to board meetings, I'm one of two other students, and those two other students being the student representatives. But when I went around to unit lunch to see a lot of people's ideas about like the school and like the school board, a lot of them are very well engaged about what happened with Care Plus and what happens, with like the LGBTQ issues. But alas, like none of them are going to those board meetings to speak out. And I think a lot of that kind of stems from either they're, hearing about these issues independently, or hearing it again within their own enclaves, but they don't have that centralization that those larger movements have. So they kind of feel a little bit more isolated. And this is and in turn kind of what happens even on the local scale is we have reference falsification, which I talked about in my AP seminar paper. And it's basically where people kind of falsify their beliefs in order to match the whole. And so even if that belief isn't like, oh, yes, I'm for this, or yes, I'm not, it might just be ambivalent. Nobody else is as passionate about this issue as I am, so I'll just act like I don't even know about it. And then that's why we're not getting that sort of galvanization that other movements get, is that lack of visibility of other people.
Do you think a lot of the youth feel, well, the adults are gonna make the decision anyway, so what's the point of me going?
Yeah, I think a lot of that is kind of with that lack of political self-efficacy, believing that their voice and their actions don't matter. And that's also why civic education is important, to show young people that the people that do participate in a democracy can and do make a difference. Because I think that's another big reason for political apathy, both among adults and young people.
I gotta share this anecdote, you just reminded me of it too, my wife also works at the high school, but she's a vice principal, so she's got. Seniority on me and everything else, so we had a sophomore, and I guess there was a decision made to trim back lunch by like, was it 5 minutes or something?
Yeah.
So a petition went out, and so my son, he comes downstairs and he's like, hey, I want to talk to you. My son, he thinks, you know, he ruminates, he's very purposeful with his thinking, and he says, so there's this petition, and I'm kind of conflicted. And his conflict was he has an administrator mother, who didn't make the decision herself, but represents, you know, the authority, right? The establishment. And dad, who's like, you know, hey, you decide, you know, it's up to you. And she said the same, you know, hey, whatever you think's the right thing to do it. So he's ended up signing the petition, but it was interesting, his reaction, like, dude, it's okay, it's fine, you know, but it just, I was like, oh yeah, that's like, his mindset is kind of that, that's interesting. So. The thing with this is, it's interesting, like, being a teacher, being a high school teacher specifically, teenagers are, they keep you, they just keep you younger, I think, honestly. You know, it's hard to be a curmudgeon, you know, as a high school teacher. And it's just like, it's this curiosity, this newness, this, did you even think about this perspective? You know, they keep you on your toes, right? I mean, they do. And all things in between. But, you know, I guess, you know, what's important here is, you know, for me, that, now you've got me thinking, I think maybe we should lower it to 16. I wasn't sure, I was honestly on the fence, you know? And I was a devil's advocate of sorts when I made my comment, but, you know, you got me to think about it, and that's, I think, the important thing here, you know? So did anyone have any other questions or thoughts, or? Yes, sir,
What subject matter do you teach in high school?
I teach English.
Teach English, okay. Do you think there are certain subjects that are taught in school, let's just say in a civic manner, that are intended to solve a problem, but don't actually solve the problem?
I'm not sure, I mean, in my classroom, everything's sort of open-ended, and my philosophy is, I'm not gonna tell you what to think, I'm just gonna teach you how to think.
As in the curriculum isn't formatted correctly to maybe potentially deal with the issues currently being faced in the world. For example, I have.
Yeah. Yeah,
I took a debate class when I was in high school, and I'm only 2 years out of my senior year. When I was there, the kind of debate we were being taught, I would say, was a very competitive form of debate. Rather than trying to teach you about understanding your opponents, rather than listening to your opponent.
Yeah,
The objective was to purely win the arguments.
right.
Yeah.
It's
Like a
like a
card-based
thinking doesn't.
matchmaking game,
Right,
right?
right.
Almost as if it was prepping you for debate club, right? But not actually to debate in the real world, as most young people actually do want to learn.
Mhm.
When
Now,
I
there's a difference between debate and discourse. What you want is discourse, what you got with it. Like you wanna hear and understand the other side viewpoint, debating what you're describing, what is that? You want discourse, both sides, hear what each other have to say. Right, that way, you really want to debate.
Yeah, discourse can definitely be.
That's what you're having here tonight.
Can
So I
definitely
commend you, but you to do that.
in a debate as well. I don't
Gives me hope.
think we were adequately taught the rules of debate and how to be a thoughtful thinker.
Right.
In these.
Yeah, and I think there are schools of thought on it. I mean, my school of thought is based on thousands of years ago, the Forum. Where Socrates and those cats would pepper people with questions, and then you'd have people purposely like there, the sophists would be there to throw out like some whataboutisms, and everybody like, what are you talking about? And then, you know, Socrates was there, he would purposely act stupid. He'd be like, explain what the air is. I've never felt it in my life. And he forced people to kind of stop and think, be like, "Oh, yeah, why do I think this?" Right? And to have that discourse. And it was about enlightenment. It was about enlightening minds, it was about learning from one another. And that's very old, right? But
Well,
Yeah.
that's how you have a constructive debate. You have to
Absolutely.
be able to understand your opponent and able to really be able to progress the argument in some context, because obviously one side can just say one random claim and the other side can either refute that or say another random claim, and if they don't come together and try to understand each other to some level, they can't progress.
yeah, and that's what the Lyceum is. Like, that's what it was. It was like, we're all here to learn. That's it. We weren't, nobody was here to argue. And what I loved about the Lyceum, I read this book about them. It's like the only book about the Lyceum. It's called like the civic classroom or something like that. And written by a professor in the 50s, and I couldn't find it. Amazon wanted to charge $325. I'm like, I'm not buying an old musty paperback for that. Sag Harbor, Long Island, a little used bookstore had it for $20. Got it in a week, cruised through it. And there was a chapter where he's talking about what the Lyceum believed, and one of their core tenets was they were, if I'm remembering the wording correctly, they were ostentatiously against political discourse in the Lyceum. They said, keep it out of here. We're about learning. That's it. And I think, you know, I've had, now this is the 8th one. We've not had a single political discussion. None of it. It's about the common ground, and it's about like stuff like this. You know, you get somebody, you get a couple people in here who are experts in that topic. They enlighten us, they get us thinking, they get us talking, and we're all gonna leave here thinking a little bit differently, and that's the point. You know, and to your point, if the goal is to just keep people fighting and then learn how to debate that way, that's okay, if we want that. But I think, you know, again, if we look back at history, there's something there. And it was a thing, you know? We just, media, that was it. Media came and it was, you can't compete, it's impossible. This is impossible. And now we're just so saturated. That's why I figured, why not try to do this, like, do it over again, let's try it, let's see, you know, maybe people will show up, and people show up. But I knew that people told us, I had a whole bunch of people, yeah, I'll see you there, I'll see you. And I know what happens. People go home like, oh, you know what, man, this is had a bowl of pasta. I don't know, I got my comfies on.
Yeah.
But this has been a fascinating experience because, you know, people want to talk, like, people want to talk, people want to come out and hear. And and they're there, you know, when I started this, I was like, do I have to do every single lecture? I hope not, you know, and I came up with the topics and I threw it out there and I had people jump at it. Now I got people jumping to do it in the new year, so. You know, do you have other questions for us?
I think that was it, yeah, that was a really good discussion, I think everyone,
No, thank you all for coming out. And, you know, can I get the thing of the Bible? I didn't wanna, steal their thunder, which they did such a tremendous job. I think we owe them a tremendous round of applause. Lyndon and Alexis, fantastic, but I wanted to go back to the idea of the posterity, because here we are, right? And Thomas Paine once wrote Common Sense to get people fired up. Let's go fight the British. Let's go. You know you want to do it. And I'm going to write this little pamphlet and we're gonna. And he said, the sun never shined on a cause of greater worth. 'Tis not the affair of a city, a county, a province, or a kingdom, but of a continent. 'Tis not the concern of a day, a year, or an age. Posterity are virtually involved in the contest and will be more or less affected even to the end of time. Prophetic words, to be sure. John Adams, known to be quite cantankerous in his day. All right, well, of our founders, he had like the worst attitude. And he wrote to his wife a lot, as I hope you know, and his first sentence of the letter is like, posterity. He's like, listen to me, listen, posterity. You will never know how much it costs the present generation to preserve your freedom. I hope you will make good use of it. If you do not, I shall repent in heaven that I ever took half the pains to preserve it. And finally, during his first year as president of the United States, the first president ever of the United States, he gives this address to the Pennsylvania legislature. He said, it should be the highest ambition of every American to extend his views beyond himself and to bear in mind that his conduct will not only affect himself, his country, and his immediate posterity, but that its influence may be co-extensive with the world and stamp political happiness or misery on ages yet unborn. Posterity. This is the posterity, right? Who's next? Here's what we're gonna have next. Actually, this will be the last lecture of this series. I've been on council for we're going on 6 years. It's been a lot, and I wanna take a little break. So I made up this little project, because I've been doing since May. And the last one is, if you're curious about how a town works and how a local government functions, and all those little where the sausage is made things. The mayor of Flemington Borough, Marshall Carroll, is going to be joining me, and we're going to be co-lecturing here. We'll be back here, and that's going to be on December 3rd. So if you enjoyed this, we hope you can join us there and maybe bring some friends, some youth, maybe a little posterity showing up. And yeah. Excellent. Well, listen, folks, I really appreciate you coming by. You can hang out. We got the place till 9. We got snacks in the back, water in the back. The violin guy left. Oh well, could have had some more violin music. But again, thank you two very much. Really appreciate it.